we have Sheri Offenhauser with Paige. And Sheri is an associate at Paige. And she has been drawn to numbers and optimization problems for as long as she can remember. At a very young age, she learned that almost anything can be quantified, if done so with detail, care, and accuracy. Sheri uses this intuition in her role as a strategic consultant and programmer planner at Paige. Since Sheri is very young, she has dedicated her life to numbers, learning and the creation of efficient response systems. She received a Bachelor's of Arts in both mathematics and urban design architectural studies at New York University, where she first identified the possible professional intersection of her interests. In continuing with this pairing, Sheri earned a Master of Mathematics from UT Austin, writing her thesis with both a mathematics and an architecture advisor on the qualification of space using continuously changing but quantifiable mathematical vectors called isovists. In the years after graduate school, Sheri focused her professional efforts on mathematics education, specifically in the K-12 independent school sector. During the summer, Sheri directed a program for the Houston area public school students interested in STEM careers. For almost the entirety of her schooling and professional career, Sheri has successfully married her love of mathematics with her interest in architecture. Her transition to programming and planning has been a natural progression for Sheri's interest, skill sets, and professional goals.
That was, sorry.
Sheri, we're very, very excited to have you here. Thank you very much for being a part of this retreat. Your topic is space utilization, independent schools, and I give you the floor.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you very much. I think I'm done now. I feel great about myself. I'm going to leave. Yes, no. So thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be working on this with Building Solutions. So let me go ahead and see if I can share my screen so you can all see what I am looking at. Okay, let me know that you see my leading slide, please.
We do.
Excellent. Okay, perfect. Okay, so again, I'm here to tell you about space utilization studies in independent schools. And I want to start off first here, just telling you a little bit, well, let's see. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I don't know that I can tell you any more than William just did. He summed it up wonderfully and with such enthusiasm. So yeah, as he said, I spent the first 14 years of my professional life in pre-K through 12 education. I worked in 3 different schools in 2 different states. I was department chair and director of a summer STEM institute. I have a lot of experience in schools, and I have a lot of experience from the position of an educator. I know what it's like to be a teacher. I know what it's like to not have a lot of space or to have poor space. So that's one of the things that I find most interesting about doing the space utilization studies is that I have been in many instances where I wish my school would have had one. Just fun fact, this is a picture of me teaching multivariable calculus. This picture was staged, but these are my real students. This was my real classroom, and this is what I really did for quite a number of years. So I did decide to leave teaching for various reasons, and this is basically what I do now. I work with clients in a number of different sectors: healthcare, higher ed, civic government. I engage clients in meetings, I engage them in workshops, and I try to help them determine their space needs. And I do the same in the space utilization studies, right? Trying to help schools determine what they need, what is working, and what could be working better, right? That's what I do. So about a year ago, I got in contact with Building Solutions, and I've been working to form one of my sort of dream partnerships, and that is working with a company to help schools have the best facilities they can have for the teachers and their students, right? So like I said, this is I have married all of these things that I love: planning and programming with education, helping teachers, helping students, helping schools. If you haven't had a space utilization study done, I highly recommend it. It's very informative. And so now let me tell you exactly what it entails. So first I'm going to do sort of an overview, and then I'll get down into the sort of nuts and bolts as to what the process actually entails. So first, we'll discuss what it is, when you should get one, and then what results that you can expect. So space utilization studies collect and analyze room use data and compare it to educational standards and current best practices. This allows schools and institutions to make decisions about how to reuse existing space and reduce the need for new space. Right? The idea is that you possibly have enough space on your campus and in your buildings. It is likely that it is not being used well. And that's what we do. We help you determine which spaces you're using well and which ones possibly need to be reprogrammed or used for another purpose. So when should a school get a space utilization study? Every few years, 5 years, is routine maintenance, just like everything else. Before building or renovating facilities, again, like I said before, many schools think that they don't have enough space. So they want to build bigger, build new. But in actuality, they have plenty of square footage. It just isn't being used well, or it isn't being used for the right reasons. Before adding specialized courses, in schools know this, but when you add a specialized course, you have a classroom that really only does one thing. And so it makes it difficult for students or for teachers to use that classroom for other functions. And it sort of takes that offline. So its utilization really decreases from, the desired, say, 80% to much lower. And then lastly, when cost of operation is a concern. So if a school is trying to save money, maybe they want to look and see if there's an entire building on site that they can take offline. And we can determine that in a space utilization study. Results. When you have a space utilization study done, you're able to tell very quickly, right, when the study is complete, how often each space is utilized over the course of the day and week, how full each classroom is while in use based on class enrollment versus classroom capacity, and then identifying underutilized non-classroom, non-office spaces. And this is a big one in schools, especially, well, actually most schools that I've seen. There are a lot of spaces on campus that serve specific functions, right? There are different auditoria or different, there's a special room with nice furniture that's only used on, the second Friday of the third month of the year. And it's a great space. It was, donated by someone, but it's not used. So the question is, what can that be converted to, or how can that be used for something else? One of the things that I've encountered a lot in independent schools is this idea of teacher ownership. And this is a highly controversial issue, but the idea of teacher ownership of classrooms. And I'll be honest, in my last school, I owned my classroom. I was the only person that was in it, and I loved it. But what that meant was that my classroom was at best 60% utilized. There were 3 periods of the day where my class was completely empty. And I just sat in there and worked. And that's not good use of space. If you think that most teachers have the same situation, that means that there's a lot of empty classrooms throughout the day, and the school is, considering building an entire new building because they have a shortage of space. Well, is it a shortage of space, or is it an idea that the teachers, want to own their classroom and don't want to share, right? And that sounds terrible, but is there a different way? A lot of schools want to understand how they can get more space, and so there's ways that we can help them identify that, and then help with the change management as well. Okay, So what it actually does the process entail? We'll go through sort of the very details of start to finish. The first thing you should know is that a space utilization study takes time. This is a proposed schedule and process, and this is pretty much an average one. It takes about 8 weeks. It could be done in less. If it's a very large campus with a lot of buildings or a lot of data that needs cleaning, it could take more, right? But this is a general schedule of how long it takes. And you can see sort of at the beginning of this, it takes about 2 weeks to process the information that we receive. And that's information that we hope to receive sort of an Excel format or data. And that is what I'm about to talk to you about now, is data. We love data. A space utilization study begins with good data. That's floor plans, furniture plans if you have them, a very detailed schedule of how all of your rooms are being used at all periods of the day. Now, if you do not have good data, don't worry. We can take your bad data and turn it into good data. That's not a problem. It just adds a few weeks to the schedule. We've worked with clients where they had information in Word or they had information written down on a poster. We took it, we turned it into our Excel document, and then we were able to analyze it. It's not a big deal. That's absolutely something we can help you with. So do not be scared that you don't have the right data. Additionally, if you don't have a furniture plan, not a big deal. We can help you there too. We just go in and take pictures. I will go in and take a picture of every room and figure out what furniture you have in there, how it's laid out. A lot of times we know the classroom capacity, but is that actually the number of students that are being put in that room, right? So that's what we want to figure out, because ultimately we are going to make some calculations. Everyone doing okay so far? Is everyone awake? People at their desks.
We're doing great. We're all at our desk watching and listening intently.
Yay! It's so hard when I can't see anyone's faces. Okay. All right. The next part, after the data collection. And it's a really fun part of the space utilization study. And that's the stakeholder meetings, right? These are essential to making sure that we understand the questions that we need to address when doing these studies. The groups that we like to meet with, and this is not an exhaustive list, mind you, this is a list of people that we try to set up meetings with, but by all means, we will set up meetings with whoever you want us to. Teachers, first and foremost. Specialists, counselors, tutors, librarians. Anyone that has rooms that might need to be sized differently than we might think. Administration, right? Anyone in the administration that might have a stake in this or a comment. And then, of course, the most important, the headmaster or the headmistress. Okay. In stakeholder meetings, the things that we really try to understand, any concerns that people have. Do they feel like there's too much space somewhere, too little space somewhere? Do they see students congregating in the hallways or sitting in hallways? Do they see certain parts of the school that aren't being used as they should? What are the things that they notice that maybe we should dive deeper into when we're doing our studies? Are there specific individual or department needs, right? What we hear sometimes is that, the history department wants a history department office, right? For them, maybe it's not individual classrooms that they want. They don't mind sharing, but what they really want is a department office, or maybe they want a place where they can collaborate and share their resources. And finally, are there other specialized spaces? Is there a learning center? Is that something that's really important? So before we dive into the objective analysis, we want to know what are the specialized spaces that we should be aware of. Some goals that schools are often trying to achieve, which we see pretty regularly: smaller class sizes, right? And I think we're going to be seeing that a lot more in the future here. Increased long-term enrollment. A lot of schools are trying to add more students to their roster, but it's not as easy as just putting more kids in the classes, right? You have to make room for them. So how are you going to do that if you have a finite set of classrooms? And lastly, collaborative learning and teaching spaces, right? Everyone knows that 21st century learning is sort of moving to the forefront of the way classes are taught. And teacher-centered learning is taking a backseat to student-centered learning. So how does that play into space planning? And how is that being reflected in the way that classrooms are designed in terms of square footage per student, et cetera? So these are things that schools are often trying to address, and a space utilization study can really dive into how spaces can support those goals. So in terms of what you can expect from a space utilization study, so we've been through the process, right? We start off with data, and then we have meetings. And after all of this, what you can expect to get in a report, right? One of the first things is we look at analysis on a micro level, right? So we're going to look at the actual classrooms. And we're going to use standards from your state. We're going to use standards from your accrediting association, right? In this particular case, with this particular client, we used as a minimum standard the TEA, the Texas Education Agency. This does not mean this is ideal. This means this is a minimum standard. For a school wanting more 21st century learning, these square footages in these areas should be higher, right? More collaboration means more space per student. Again, just a minimum. So the way it works, again, on a micro level, we're going to look at each classroom, and we're going to say, okay, is your classroom appropriately sized? Is your classroom undersized? Is it oversized? And we're going to give you a very basic, straightforward chart that just gives you an objective readout of the size of your classroom. And if you notice here, in this particular analysis of this particular school, there are 3 classrooms that are actually significantly oversized. 2 of them could be 2 classrooms. One of them, almost 2, right? 1.5 classrooms. So you see here that just from a very quick objective analysis, that you can tell which classrooms are like oversized. And at the same time, there's some classrooms that are undersized as well. And again, especially going forward now in the times that we're in, these undersized classrooms, these are going to be red flags to people. We'll do the same micro analysis to the offices. Depending on the function of the offices, we typically look at a 10 by 12 standard size. Most office functions can accommodate or can perform their functions within a 10 by 12. This isn't always the case, and this is why we like to have our meetings with our stakeholders. Some offices need larger sizes, and so we want to know that. But for the offices that can perform their functions in a standard size office, we'll then compare the current size office to the standard 120, and again, produce this, red, yellow, green chart to let you know visually very quickly how your offices are sized. With this particular client, you can tell that the majority of their offices are actually oversized, and some of them are so oversized that they might even serve as a new classroom. And if not a new classroom, they might be able to be a conference room, a collaboration space, a teacher office. There's a number of things that you could do with some of these oversized offices, right? So again, when we do our analysis, we first start off and look small, and then we start to get bigger, right? So we've looked at the offices, we've looked at the classrooms. Now we're going to look at the buildings. So in this chart, which would be included in a typical space utilization study, you can see how the actual need of the actual need of the functions of the building is compared to the area that's used in the building. A great example would be looking at Building 6. Building 6 in this study is 100% administration. Those are the only functions that are occurring there. And say it is some number of offices, my guess is something like 9 offices. It currently occupies, 2,900 square feet. But in reality, it really only needs right around 1,000 square feet. So you have close to 2,000 extra square feet of space being used that is unnecessary, right? And so if you do this for administration and classroom for each of the buildings, you're able to quickly see, right in this chart, how each of the buildings themselves are either overutilized or underutilized, right? So we've started small and we're working our way bigger, right? Classrooms, offices, now buildings, and now we'll go even bigger than that. Let's look at the campus. So for this particular client, they were looking at increasing their enrollment, right? They were going to increase their enrollment slowly over, say, 10 years. So you can see that in 2020, they had enough space. 2021, enough space. 2022, just enough. But in 2023, they were actually going to not have enough space for the students in the required number of classrooms to support those students. If we think about what this means, right, in 2023, they would have to have their new facility number 1. That would be required. But how long does it take to have a new facility, right? It takes a couple years to go through the process of designing, building, etc. So if they want to have enough space for their students in 2023, they need to start this process of designing, permitting, building, etc. at least a couple years back, right? But having this analysis is key so that they start this process early enough. And then you can see, again, with their enrollment goals, that in 2028, they're going to outgrow the new facility number 1 and are going to have to start building new facility number 2, right? The last thing that you can expect from a space utilization study is a much more general space list showing what the needs are for the school, not based on building, not based on site, just based on student population and space needs. This is not a complete space list for this school. This is just classrooms by grade, where the students don't change classrooms, classrooms by subjects, right, for 3rd through 8th grade, and then specialty spaces. This doesn't include admin. This doesn't include any of the facility staff. But you can see here the 2023 usable versus the 2030 usable. You can see the change based on the enrollment, how the spaces change and the usable square footage changes. And this is something else that you get, like I said, which just shows you the overall required square footage and helps you determine, right, you can have this square footage allocated wherever you want to on site. This is just what you're going to need. Okay. All right, now the question that everyone has, right, what's going to happen to schools in this post-pandemic or current pandemic environment that we're living in, right? How can a space utilization study help you reopen schools safely for students? And the one sort of low-hanging fruit for space utilization studies in a COVID society is they absolutely help when you need to increase your distance between students, right? The AIA put this graphic out. This shows how a single classroom with 800 students typically fit 24 desks, right? But now when trying to plan for a post-COVID society, we're looking at 12 desks per classroom, right? So you have your distance between kids is 6 feet. This is a huge difference in number of kids per class. This doesn't just happen, right? Where did the other kids go? So fewer students per classroom translates into an increased number of necessary teaching spaces. Where do these spaces come from, right? They don't just materialize. You have to find them. That's where an SUS can come into play here. We can help you answer the questions, where are the spaces that are underutilized? And are there any non-educational spaces that can be reprogrammed? And the answer to that one is yes, always yes. So what we're seeing is, number one, there are always spaces that can be reprogrammed. You have hallways. You can't really teach in hallways, but there are spaces. If you need spaces to put students during free periods, you can renovate hallways very quickly, very cheaply, and you can have spaces to have students if they need a place to be during a free period. This frees up places like the library, where you can actually program them for classes. Similarly, there are outdoor spaces that have been underutilized, if even utilized, where classes can be held with just a little bit of work. There's been a lot of discussion about cafeterias not actually having students eat at lunch. Cafeterias can be reprogrammed with a little bit of new furniture, and classrooms can be held in there. Similarly, gymnasiums. If students are not taking gym, why not use that gym for classes? Again, a little bit of new furniture, and you can reallocate that space for classes. A space utilization study, what we can do very easily is, looking at your square footage, we can work backward, right? We can say, this is how much space you have. This is how many kids you can fit on your campus, right? We can give you the number, and then we can help you figure out how to get them there. That is all that I have. I know I rushed through that. I am a fast talker. If you have any questions, I am now ready to field them or not field them, depending on how I feel about the question.
Well, first and foremost, thank you very much. Great presentation. Very, very educational. I was reading something earlier. You mentioned about 60, a classroom utilizes about 60% or a 60% utilization rate.
Yeah.
What is an ideal utilization rate in your experience? I don't know that 100% is truly capable, but what's an ideal percentage that schools could try to hit?
I think it's about 85. Yeah, it also depends upon the actual classroom schedule, right? If there's 8 periods of the day, like depending on the number of periods there are, that percentage is going to change. But I believe it's about 85. And it's also different. It's also different for college, like for higher ed, than it is for middle school, and it is for lower school. Like it's different per age group.
The utilization rate is different for each one?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can you expand on that just a little bit?
No.
Okay.
I can look it up, and I can tell you where I found the different utilization rates. I don't know why. I can research why they're different, but I know that I read that they're different. I can dig into. I'll look into that.
Got it. Totally understand.
Okay.
I have a question. This is Kevin Folsom.
Yes.
Yeah, I love what you have here. Data makes things so much easier, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have a cost per square foot for something like this?
For a space utilization study?
Yes. Yeah. What should you plan or budget for something of that nature? Per square foot.
I do not have. That is a great question. I do not have an answer to that. I do not have an answer to that either. I'm gonna keep taking the fifth on all of this.
Well, I really love the fact that you're able to show to the strategic plan at the school, you're wanting to grow this much, but you need to know what your current inventory is, and you need to know 2 years before, because if you're going to be building or renovating, you need to know that 2 years before.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that sort of the, the idea of having the spatialization study done every 5 years, sort of on a maintenance basis, is really important, because schools are constantly thinking about these goals, but they don't always have these studies done up to date. So having a clear picture of, these are all the things that need to happen, by this year, and then constantly updating that living document is a really good thing to have, because when one chip
Yeah,
falls, so does the other.
So it would be important, once this comprehensive study is done, to keep it up every year.
Absolutely, yes. Or at least every few years, yeah, just updating.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Kevin, that actually kind of flows into what you said in your presentation as far as keeping things up to date. You have a financial audit, you keep that up to date. You have a facility audit, you keep that up to date. You do the spatialization plan, you keep that up to date.
Yeah.
It's like everything else. You keep everything up to date. You'll keep things last more in tune or lasting longer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And more efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, and space utilization too is also very much aligned with the golden ratio.
I had never thought about that.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, I just know that it's interesting that schools will, and I referenced this a little bit in the discussion. Schools will say change their schedule from, maybe I just said this in my head. They'll change their schedule from like a 6x5 to a block day schedule or something that's rotating, and they don't realize that this actually affects, like, this can have great effects on how the spaces are utilized or how classrooms are free. In case, or just in general, how classrooms are free, or the utilization of different rooms. So when you look at maintaining your SUS, it's important that you get it done anytime a major change has happened in the school.
That's very good. Thank you, Sheri. Does anybody else have any questions for Sheri?
I don't have, like, this is Maureen. I don't have one right now, but if we think of one, like right now, I'm kind of on the spot and I can't.
Yes, email me.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. That was great.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, very enlightening, very helpful.
Yay. I like when people like graphs and charts. That's my language.
All right. Well, Sheri, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you, Kevin, also for your earlier presentation.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody, for attending the 2020 Building Solutions HPC Retreat. This concludes the retreat for this year, and we hope to see you back next year.